KYOT. Coyote.
Remember, site acquired, fire.
Welcome to Fort Apache, a Halo 3 multiplayer map constructed by Dutch Bedlift. It's a remake of the classic Halo Combat Evolved map, Hang 'em High. The download link is in the description. This is going to be a thorough video as we take an in-depth look with Instructor Laspina, owner of Spear Training Group. We are focused on making the Halo weapons we choose to be more practical without any tactical eyepieces. As seen in Halo Combat Evolved, all of the Marines that are deliberately assaulting, that have a planned mission, they're all fitted with their gear. But what if you did not have any heads-up display to help you aim? No advanced neural link like the Spartans, just a standard neural link transponder. Or you're a civilian trying to survive, utilizing any weapon you could find. How practical are some of these firearms, really? We see plenty of civilians use these weapons. Imagine you picking one up right now. A standard issue firearm straight from Mizraya Armory. Not originally produced to fight the Covenant, but instead other humans.
Gunfire. Magnums. Security sidearms. Standard issue.
Overall, this is a fun topic to think about and create a video for.
Ear protection is required for all personnel.
The first weapon we will look at, the shotgun. And we are only focused on the weapons that Instructor Laspina will show on screen, which means we are not concerned about how a particular weapon evolved in the later Halo games, but rather the more traditional Halo weapons we've been accustomed to for over the past 15 and more years. In this video, we must consider three important phrases: rule of cool, rule of practical, and rule of lore. Instructor Laspina will elaborate more. Spear Training Group offers training on the firing range to include consulting with individuals and businesses in need for security guidance, with full range to support the entertainment industry as well. As we all know here on my channel, it's all about the little details. So Instructor Laspina took a deep dive into the weapon statistics and played Halo through VR to get a better understanding what it's like to really aim down the sights and experience the reload process with these fictional firearms and how impractical they would be compared to his real firearms. I'll turn it over to Instructor Laspina.
Hello there once again. I want to thank KYOT for the opportunity to look into this a little bit more, and let's take a look at some things. In the entertainment industry, be it movies, video games, whatever. Rule of cool rules. This is the idea just to create something entertaining, something unique, something just a little bombastic. It doesn't necessarily need to be practical, doesn't necessarily need to follow the existing lore, but it does need to be cool, right? So rule of cool is just simply that. It's just going to be fun and entertaining. Rule of lore. This is going to be what information is actually provided. Now notice that they don't necessarily have to be connected, but they can be. Generally, rule of lore is going to apply whenever there is a book already written or the lore is already present and somebody just wants to create some really cool media. Perfectly fine, but it's important to remember these are completely different. Rule of practical is also completely different. Practical embodies thousands of years of scientific development, technological development. There's a reason most of the guns that have come out in the past 60, 70 years or so have been mostly the exact same thing. Just manipulation of physics to help itself load itself a little easier, faster, and better. That's all it's been for about the past 60, 70 years or so. Rule of practical looks at that. So let's talk about those relationships. When the book is already written, say Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings, then whatever media being created has to follow the rule of cool, and vice versa. So sometimes whenever we're creating a really cool Helm's Deep setup, it doesn't exactly repeat itself to what is actually written. God forbid they miss out on Tom Bombadil. Point being, they're also going to miss out on rule of practical, as in how orc and human formations completely lack some of the realism in the movies and in the books sometimes. It's okay, but it's important to remember your source information may not always coincide with the other sources of information. That's perfectly okay. That's where we're gonna start delving into this. So in this particular situation, Halo already existed as a design with, say, the Magnum, the assault rifle. From there, books, authors, and other creators created reasons for why the Magnum and the assault rifle looked the way it did. Maybe even some of the artists filled in somehow how those things worked. Sometimes they do that, but ultimately, it still harkens back to rule of cool is law. And they created reasons why the lore works and is practical. What I am going to do is take that rule of cool and I'm going to point it directly at rule of practical. This here means very little to me, with one exception: measurements. These things are critical and they have real-world implications. Those real-world implications tell us a lot about how the weapon really functions, and it can tell us if the weapon is actually practical. Let's talk about why rule of practical is very important before we get too far. Rule of practical is very important because whenever the weapon or the designs are practical, whenever there's symbiosis between these two here, these two are equal, it makes creating the lore a lot easier. The guy writing the book doesn't have to try that hard because it already makes sense. They don't have to explain anything about why it exists. You just kind of understand it. That is why this is important. That is why consultation services for technical details that get sourced in a lot of credits are very necessary. Artists don't necessarily know how guns work or why uniforms contain certain patterns or helmets have certain mounts on them. So, getting a technical consultant can help create that rule of practical. So let's take a look at our first culprit here. I'm going to acknowledge that these are two completely different shotguns from different games or genres or eras. That's completely irrelevant to me. I'll explain why. So on this particular Halopedia page, most of this doesn't matter to me. Reason being, a visual description doesn't mean much to me. Which Halo it was in, that doesn't tell me anything. Operational history, I don't care whose hand it was in. Functionality tells me exactly how a perfectly normal function works. Shotgun function works, so doesn't really help. The design details don't provide much, with the generalization that this was brought about due to a specific round of ammunition, which is not unusual. Sometimes that happens. And it's cost effective. Okay, cool. That shows that there is a certain amount of consideration to this lore about the cost of materials. That says that this isn't just an infinitely wealthy government or source of resources. There is a limit here, so it needs to be considered. So that's important to remember. Let's look at some of this technical data. Manufacturer, don't care. Fictional universe, it doesn't mean nothing to me. Model, doesn't matter. Pump action. Okay, here we go. Pump action is important. It's very well depicted in the game. You shoot the gun, you pump the pump here, and you chamber the new round, you shoot again. That's perfectly okay. There are generally two different types of shotgun, semi-auto and pump action. Pump action requires your manual input, obviously pumping of the forend here. Semi-auto is going to load itself. Currently, semi-autos are becoming more reliable, but they're not super reliable. There's still a very wide range of ammunition types, so there are benefits to having a pump action. Because some ammunitions might be lighter loads, so they might not actually cycle the bolt of a shotgun. So, having a pump action shotgun allows that wide variety of ammunition, regardless of pressure range, and it's still going to function. The problem with pump action, because it requires your manual input of pulling this pump backwards and then back forwards, it means there's sometimes that you're going to pull it back not far enough and bring it back forward. This is what we call a short stroke. It might be enough to eject the empty, but not enough to load the new one into the chamber. This is actually a very common thing. You see it in people who get extreme stresses if they never train with the shotgun. They'll short stroke their shotgun. So I'm not here to say whether or not this is a good design or not, because it ultimately doesn't matter. If it was semi-auto, it would still be prone to the similar malfunctions. It doesn't really matter in the end, so I'm not going to change that. Overall length, this is somewhat important, but only whenever we're considering the size of the shells. So these shells are 3 3/4 inches. That is very long for a shotgun shell. These are also an 8 gauge, substantially large. That's about I believe it's another inch or so in diameter compared to a 12 gauge, for example. That means it's going to hold extra powder, extra pellets, and stuff like that. This here is an industrial 8 gauge load. This here is double-aught buck 9 pellet. Only 2 3/4. So this is not as long as the one depicted in the Halo universe, but it is certainly double-aught buck, which is what's claimed by the lore description. And this particular loading has 9 pellets. I don't know how many it actually has in game, but
Let's see. In Halo 3, I was consistently counting 15 decals. I shot at other surfaces and continued getting the same number, so 15 pellets were coming out in Halo 3, which is also the same number as in Halo Reach. And we also want to consider the spread of these pellets. Across the Halo games, the spread is inconsistent. Additionally, the decal count in classic Halo 2 is not consistent, but the Halo 2 Anniversary Edition does have consistency of 12 decals. Reverting back all the way to Halo Combat Evolved, we get the 15 decals. I've always enjoyed how Halo Combat Evolved retained the accumulation of bullet hole decals.
here's an easy way to equate double-aught buck. Each individual buckshot pellet weighs almost as much as a 9mm bullet, and it travels at almost the same velocity. So one shotgun shell, for a 12 gauge shotgun that is similar to firing about 7 to 8 9mm bullets at one time from a handgun. Considering we're talking an 8 gauge shotgun, magnum loaded at 3 inches, 3 3/4 inches. This is a substantially large shell. This is a crazy amount of recoil, and I'm aware there may be some recoil dampening technologies. Here's the thing. Regardless if there's recoil dampening technologies or not, equal and opposite forces exist. So if the UNSC or if this shotgun is somehow housing recoil, it is still absorbing it somewhere else. Physics are the same regardless. And I highly doubt they have recreated laws of physics in this universe. If you're taking an 8 gauge magnum round of recoil into the shoulder, which, by the way, most people can't even take 12 gauge double-aught buck, that energy is still being dissipated somewhere into this shotgun, which is translating somewhere into the shooter or into their recoil dampening technology. You're getting a substantial blast to your senses and your technology and your capabilities every single time the shotgun goes off in this particular caliber range. Now, someone's going to argue, this shotgun was designed for fighting Covenant. Yeah, you're going to want this type of shotgun to fight Covenant. It's kind of hard to believe that whenever it's in service dictated as insurrection. So we were fighting people with this shotgun. This shotgun was designed to fight people. Its original intent in 8 gauge Magnum was to destroy other human beings. 12 gauge does that perfectly fine already. There's no reason to really up gauge. And you could say it's, armor technology. Well, armor technology doesn't get defeated by shotgun shells. It's about all I have on the lore page. So let's take a look at the actual items here. First off, shotguns are usually employed into 2 specific genres. They're either utility or they're combat. Utility is going to include breaching doors, breaching equipment, breaching gates, things like that. It's not really the front runner in the combat, but it can be if needed. But its main goal is to punch holes in things and create openings. Now, I'm aware these are 2 completely different variants, and sure, there's probably a history behind both of them. It's not something that's relevant to me. Doesn't matter to me. They're both similar enough in design that I'm going to use them both for different things. Number 1, this barrel is way too thin to be anything close to 8 gauge, let alone 12 gauge. It's way too thin to be 12 gauge. This is claiming to be a 12 shell dual tubular non-detachable magazine. None of the media I can find has either of these tubes side by side or double stacked to be what this description says. And an 8 gauge, which is significantly more round, outright incorrect. I don't care which variant it is. None of the variants I've found can actually store 12 shells, especially at 3 3/4 inches. There is a shell type called an Aguila mini shell, which could theoretically be stored up to that capacity. But again, per lore description, it states 3 75 of an inch. There's no way that's the case. You can even see in the weapon models, it's not an Aguila mini shell. Magazine tube, we're gonna edit that. Sighting system, actually pretty adequate for shotgun. You don't need it to be precise, it just needs to be mostly point and direction. One of the techniques behind shooting shotgun is just predictive movements. You see your target and then your gun just kind of appears into the optic. A lot more technicalities to that, but these sights are more than adequate for shotgun type sights. They are very quick, very reflexive. They work. This tube and how it gets thicker back here and here, it wouldn't really need to be, considering we're loading shells in right here and they go down the tube. It doesn't need to be that big, but it could just be a tubular shroud. Your magazine tube is an extremely fragile part on shotguns. If it receives, say, a dent in the middle of combat, you have pretty much disabled the entire magazine tube from properly feeding into the gun. So, makes sense to have some reinforcing ribs. Not going to change anything there. It's all good to go. Barrel, already went over that. It's a little thin. It does appear to have some additional knurling here, or threading, possibly some additional machining, which could insinuate that there's a built-in choke. I'm going to assume so. It would make sense. The embedded flashlight, it's not unreasonable. There's a Surefire 4 for M3 shotguns, I believe they are, that have similar things here. What I am going to say is that all of this additional space doesn't need to exist. The flashlight just needs to be housed, and that's it. All of this space reduces your leverage on the weapon, so we're gonna get rid of that here soon. I have no clue what this is. This could be a pump release. The problem is if you're releasing this with your thumb, then the rest of your hand is kind of in a weird placement, which you're not naturally doing already. Maybe you're intentionally coming up with your thumb and rolling your hand around the other end. Again, this isn't a natural way. It's very unergonomic. It's a very intentional, deliberate movement that is already made easier with modern technology. This block of material on modern shotguns is usually where your safety and pump release are stored at. There don't appear to be anything on the left side of the weapon, so I'm going to assume they're on the right side of the weapon. I don't see anything really wrong with the shotgun itself as far as fire controls. I'm assuming that this portion here is a safety, crossbolt safety. The assault rifle has a crossbolt safety, so it would make sense to have simplistic controls across all platforms. It simplifies training. Back onto the stock cheek weld here is very high. If you're going to get behind these sights, you're really going to be pressing your cheekbone and your orbital bone down into this just to properly see your rear and front sights lining up properly. We're going to reduce that down a little bit. Don't know exactly what this is, but there are some butt stocks that allow you to house spare or additional shotgun shells. So I'm going to assume this is some type of storage compartment for additional shotgun shells, or maybe additional equipment like batteries or something like that. Before someone says it, oh, you don't need to go behind the sights, you have a smart link or something. Well, the assault rifle has an entire computer on the top that was justified by being a smart link. The Magnum has a large hump that is apparently smart link, neural link system, smart scope, laser. I don't care.
Remember, sight, acquire, fire.
It does not exist on this shotgun. So the fact that the reticle even exists in the heads-up display on this shotgun, but has to be justified on all the other guns, shows me that rule of lore is interfering with the rule of practical. If the technology for rule of lore tech exists, if the tech exists in your lore, it should be on all tech items. That's just simply it. If it has to be justified on your Magnum, and your assault rifle as a computer, where is it here? And not for nothing, before this gets taken way too seriously, as a reminder, they were designed with the wonderful rule of cool. ROC. There you go. As I say that, I'm going to look way too far into this. This here does not need to exist. It could be argued that this is a smart link system or something along those lines. Again, doesn't exist up here. So it's a lack of technology on other equipment. It shows lack of uniformity. You could say, oh, well, it didn't exist up here. That's fine and dandy, whatever. Even looking at the 3D models and the renditions in game, they look nothing like the other computers in the lore or in the systems or in the modeling. So I doubt this serves any function. It could be argued that the pump has to slide along this track. I can show you modern examples of shotguns that don't have this, and they slide along the barrel and magazine tubes. I can show you entire shotguns like the M1014, for example, where the forend on it houses an entire gas system along with the barrel and the magazine feed tube underneath its forend. If Halo's shotgun 500 years in the future can't do it, there's been a severe deficiency of engineers in the world. Some of the areas that I'm going to be looking into: thickening barrels, extending magazine tubes, reducing excess bulk and material here. Again, remember, this is a cost-efficient reduction. So having extra material, extra beef and meat and potatoes doesn't make sense. Trigger guard. I love meat. Some talking points on a trigger guard, but these are actually pretty good trigger guards. We're going to reduce these stocks a little bit. We're going to add some extra hardware. And I believe that's about it. Let's go ahead and take a look. Again, let's talk about the function of these. Breacher shotgun. It's very much just equipment to create openings. It doesn't necessarily need to be a fighting shotgun. The combat shotgun is a fighting shotgun. We need magazine capacity, tube capacity. We need barrel length. And we just need overall combat capability, shootability, if you will. Let's take a look at these. I'm going to click a few times back and forth here. Notice how the breacher shotgun is much more compact. Shorter tube. Generally with breaching, you're only shooting about 2 to maybe 3 shells at a time to get an opening functional. You don't need to reach out and get them pellets very far, because with the breaching shotgun, you're point blank up against whatever you're breaching. The stock is less important because, again, you're not worried about follow-up shots necessarily. You just need to brace enough to get the door open. No flashlight, because, well, you're right up against whatever you're breaching. If you had a flashlight on a breaching shotgun, it could flood through the opening at the bottom. You could inadvertently click it off, and that gives a signifier to the opposition that you're right there on the other side of it. Negligent discharges of flashlights are massively dangerous. In the combat shotgun, longer tube, longer barrel, thicker profile on all of it, slight reductions in the stock there, and reductions in both pumps overall. So let's take a look at that. Breaching shotgun, we have a breaching muzzle device here. Allows you to really press up against odd angles. This is going to look a little weird here. Let's say this is a doorknob. Allows you to kind of press up against there, which gets you a good angle for your blasting material to cut into traditional doorknobs like today. Or maybe a chain link fence. You can loop your breaching device into the chain link fence to help blast it, and some other materials I'm not really going to get into listing, but if you're having a hard time getting into some type of crate or some other type of obstruction, a shotgun might be able to help you. But again, it doesn't need to be huge. This is a utility tool. When it's not currently in use, you throw it on your back or something. I did include a folding stock mechanism. So this stock can come up over the top. I changed the color of my reticle, and it can just fold right up over here. The measurement's going to be a little off, but that is the general idea of that. And we're going to go with that green will do. Remove the flashlight entirely. Extended this gripping mechanism. Did I extend that? Yeah, a little bit. I changed up its geometry. We had a lot more dead zone in there. We reduced that dead zone a little bit. Just brought it up, choked it up a little bit more. The weapon only needs to cycle this far anyway, so no reason to make it bigger than necessary. I did add an ambidextrous pump release, so you can do it with your shooting hand. That way you can just, whenever your fingers are all wrapped around your grip here, you can bring your shooting finger from the opposite side, click that button from the opposite side, and now your pump is released. That way you can do administrative stuff. If you didn't know, the pump on a shotgun doesn't just freely move. You actually have to hit a button if you're not firing around. Did thicken up barrel profiles just a little bit. Again, this is still too thin for even like 12 gauge. Ideally, this thing would be about like that thickness for the 8 gauge that it's claimed to be. Now, while we're here, I do want to talk about magazine tubes. So the shells are loaded in from here. They go into the tube and they compress a spring. Now, inside of this tube is a long spring and a plunger. This levels out the spring pressure. As this all gets compacted, you get all of your spring coiled up. There has to be room for that. You got to remember there's room inside the magazine tube just for the mechanical bits. From there, you got shell, shell, shell. So, this breacher shotgun, likely only going to have about 3 in the tube. Then it's also going to have 1 in the chamber mechanism. Now, there is a technique in the M1014, I believe it is, that has a ghost-loaded shell. Considering this is into the future, there's technology and design, I'm going to assume that there could be room for a ghost-loaded shell. Don't know that to be the case, but it at least gets us closer to that mythical 12-round capacity. Again, 12 rounds ain't going to happen in this caliber with that length, but let's just assume so. As opposed to the rest of it, there is enough room inside this chamber, this whole material area for loading gates and loading levers. This is all perfectly realistic mechanisms. There is enough room in this design, so they did good on the receiver design to make it functional. Last thing, combat shotgun. I allowed the tube. It originally stopped about here. I extended it a little bit more to the full length of the barrel. If you're going to have a longer barrel, may as well use it to extend your tube as well. You see this on the Marine Corps' 590 shotgun. Their tubes actually go out to about the end of the barrel. You'll also see it on 870 shotguns and Benelli M1014s or M4, whatever you want to call them. I do retain the flashlight on this. Now, it's important to note, as this flashlight beams out from this position, it's going to cast shadows of all of this material onto the wall to the right. That is less than ideal, but there's no supporting equipment this far out to really embed it further. What you're going to be doing with this type of shotgun is you're only going to be blasting it periodically anyway. You walk into a room, you blast it into the dark corner, and you turn it off real quick. So you're not giving away your possession for more than half a second, really. The pump mechanisms I've actually reduced a little bit. So if you see this portion here, there's a lot of extra meat in the original design that I just kind of reduced. Again, it serves no purpose, no reason to have it, so it's been reduced. Again, excess material is going to get reduced in desperate times anyway, so things like that, they won't exist whenever desperation hits. Lastly, I did bring down the grip from the top shotgun variant because it just looked good, so why not throw it down there, whatever. The stock I mostly kept the same. I did keep this mechanism in there. Whatever its purpose is, we're going to assume it's fully functional on a combat shotgun. No reason not to be. This is a primary loadout for somebody. This is a utility loadout. It's kept somewhere else. This is in their hands at all times. Do want to talk about 2 more things. The pellet spread on the shotgunning game and the loading mechanism. We'll do the loading mechanism first. Loading into the top kind of seems like a cool idea, and it is. However, all of our modern shotguns load from the bottom, so we've created and trained ourselves to do exactly that. We have a lot of techniques that do this. Defensive shotgun loading, for example, is one shell at a time, loaded in with your offhand. That way you still have your firing hand ready to go at all times. So you do one, then you do one, then you do one, so on and so forth. That's bottom loading. Takes a little bit of time. You can speed load multiple shells at a time. This is more of a competition drill, upside down with your offhand. That way you still maintain your firing grip on the weapon, but the weapon's upside down, so it's easier to get to with your offhand. That specific technique would work very good for this type of loading. Basically, you can stack up 2 to even 4 more rounds in your hand, and you can just slam 2, and then you go back to your whatever your rig is, grab 2 or 4 more, slam 2. There are a lot of different techniques that this top loading mechanism could actually do. But because we don't really have any shotguns designed like that today, nobody learns that loading technique. It would be a specifically trained type thing. Even today, 3-gun shooters, the thing that makes them the most effective is learning how to do shotgun loading. So learning this specific technique would be very technical, but very worthwhile, because the biggest hindrance to a shotgun is loading it. Lastly, pellet spread. In game, the pellet spread is like 5 to 10 feet. There's no way that's realistic. And if that was how that weapon actually would perform, that is atrocious and not worth any bit of the weight that would be necessary. Your combat capabilities would be so negative. The shotgun represented in game is absolutely horrible. However, due to a wonderful conversation with Mr. KYOT, he pointed out that the shotgun, how it was originally designed, again, really cool, right up here, this here, was originally to counter the sword. And in this context, it makes sense. That is a rock, paper, scissor assessment of the mechanics of the weapon. The sword is the ultimate close range. However, what counters it in that brief window before it smacks you and kills you? The shotgun does. So under that guise, it makes sense. However, simply applying this rule here makes the shotgun incredibly dangerous. Again, remember, it's like shooting 7, 8, 9mm bullets with one single pull of the trigger. And considering this is in a larger caliber, apparently, that makes it even more dangerous. So a shotgun like this, especially with the proper loading, which I'm assuming they're going to have on a battlefield and in the future, can reach man-sized targets out to about 50 yards. Go Google Federal Flight Control, 12-gauge Federal Flight Control. It is a nasty shotgun round that keeps together for a very long distance. And depending on your shotgun and stuff, it is more than capable of devastating a human being-sized target out to substantial distance. And it's carrying a large amount of energy. Energy doesn't fall off necessarily as quickly as some people think. Make sure to remember that. This shotgun with the longer barrel, especially assuming there is a choke mechanism in here, with the right loads, you're going to be like multiplying your in-game range by 5 times. So imagine shooting your in-game shotgun at 5 times the distance and still getting that same result. This would just be the meta. Nothing else would need to exist. So that's all we got for the shotgun.
Please pick up all unused rounds.
That was awesome to see, and I agree we could use a tighter shotgun spread. Hanging out in the stratosphere, we are going to take a look at another weapon. A well-known weapon in Halo, but rather peculiar when we take a deep dive into it, the SMG.
Now it's important to note, SMGs, submachine guns, came about in a time when people were firing full power cartridges. Huge bullets, 30-06, 7mm Mauser, out of bolt action rifles. And then someone said, hey, why don't I just put this pistol bullet in a rifle caliber? And SMGs came the way. Since then, we've been able to have better technology in manufacturing and just ammunition technology, materials technology that has created rifle calibers that are extremely good in very small packages like this. Consider 300 Blackout, for example. 300 Blackout is pretty much just annihilated submachine gun existence. Not to say there's not a place for them, because there's a place for everything in the gun world. Everything is pros and cons, gives and takes. But 300 Blackout has upended the entire theory of a submachine gun because it's a rifle caliber that does very short guns crazy good. It's just stupid good. With that, and we even see in the Halo universe that the submachine gun is not necessarily the go-to for your standard soldiers and troopers or Marines, but it is an emergency weapon. However, what did some special troops do, like the ODST? They specially purposed their SMGs to do a very specific mission. So you will see that in all times throughout history. Specialized people will press these things into specialized roles, but that doesn't mean they're necessarily good at everything. They just have that specific role. So let's take a look at what the SMG does good. Again, remember this. Number one, we have very low profile sights here. That would indicate to us that this is not snag resistant. You don't want it snagging up on your equipment or the vehicle you might be manning. We have a folding grip to get up out of the way. And I did check the geometry. This does actually fold up pretty good, especially on the model that I'm using. All of this indicates to me that this is meant to be a weapon that can be very easily packed down and concealed. Why is that important? That is important because this is not necessarily a frontline weapon. This is not intended to be the shock trooper's primary weapon. This is intended to be thrown into the side of some Scorpion tank so a crew member has something. This is intended to be in the side of a drop pod or a Pelican so the pilots have something. This is intended to be in the bridge of a ship so the crew can at least defend themselves with something. This is much smaller than the assault rifle, but it allows more firepower, depending on your definition of that word, than magnums or other sidearms. Let's take a look at some of this caliber information here. Caseless submachine gun. That's okay. That means it's not going to be spitting out a case all over the place. That's good news. Caseless ammunition has a couple of quirks to it. It has the tendency to cook off under hot temperatures. It also has the tendency to be eroded away by wet environments, or if there's debris inside of the action of the submachine gun, it tends to kind of get clogged up a little bit quicker and maybe break itself apart sometimes. There is also a thing called chain fire, where the ignition of one round can actually chain fire the rest of the magazine. Caseless is not unknown, but it can be dangerous. However, again, several hundred years into the future, theoretically, the technology is there to make this worthwhile. So we're going to remember that this is caseless. That's important. The ammunition type. Oh boy. I'm going to just say it outright. If you do these numbers and you compare these numbers to the magazine they're apparently in, it doesn't work out. The numbers don't stack correctly. It doesn't matter how stacked or thorough this is, even looking at 3D models and other measurements that I've been able to find, these numbers will not fit in this magazine type. Sorry. Tough. Don't care. Especially at 60 rounds per magazine. So we do make some changes there. 5x23 is very similar to the real world cartridge. It's a little cut off here. 5.7x28. However, let me explain cartridges a little bit. The first number is generally about the diameter of the bullet itself, the piece of metal that's going to fly out the barrel. By 23 is the overall length of the cartridge. Not the case length. This is the overall length of the cartridge. There were some miscommunications on the last one about what overall length means and what case length means. This is the overall length from the very tip of the bullet that may or may not be exposed, again, caseless ammo, to the rear of the bullet. This is what you have to consider whenever you are measuring action links and recoil systems. Worth noting though, this is a slightly smaller diameter than 5.7, and it's a slightly smaller overall length than the by 28 up here. So this bullet and cartridge is just slightly smaller overall. However, it is going 1400 feet per second. Let me explain why that's a problem. The averages of 5.7 by 28, they stick around 1955, 1657, 1679, 1660, 1813, 1558. Point being, all of those velocity measurements from a larger round are still faster than this thing. This is a very anemic round. Some of the argument for some of the other guns was, oh, well, they're fighting Covenant. And it's like, yes, they are fighting Covenant. And that makes sense why you might have a 308 or an 8-gauge shotgun or a 50 AE pistol, whatever. That makes sense. But not under the context of this. You can't use that justification for this thing. Maybe it's used to overload shields and stuff, which that is where we start drifting towards rule of lore. I can't explain that with practical because there's such a substantial difference between the universe and what's real that the only thing that can explain it would be rule of lore. Very underpowered. Gas operated. Rotating breach. Ooh. Rotating breaches are a very complex mechanism. There's not too many benefits to doing them, but there's also not a whole lot of negatives other than just slightly bulky. Times and places, depending on your design, that might be a real thing, so I have no qualms there. Not going to mess with that. Gas operated is an interesting one. Generally, gas operated is going to be reserved for larger, higher pressure rounds. Considering this is a fairly small, lower pressure round in comparison to a lot of other things, I don't think it would necessarily need to be gas operated, but, there are benefits to being gas operated. You can change pressures and stuff to lower recoil. And per the gun's performance in game, it likes to climb.
The SMG does like to climb. Here we go with a demonstration.
So some gas operation adjustment where we reduce the amount of gas feeding back into the system could reduce that recoil further, or maybe that's what they did and that's the recoil we're stuck with. Who knows? Whatever. Doesn't matter. I'm not going to change anything about operation because these are perfectly reasonable. Rate of fire, 900 rounds per minute. Submachine guns usually have a pretty high rate of fire. However, the reason they usually have a high rate of fire is because a lot of submachine guns are blowback operation, meaning there's no gas system. There's nothing like that delaying the bolt cycling other than the mass of the bolt itself. Them bolts get to moving fast. That's why a lot of machine pistols, the Glock 18, for example, is just crazy fast. Mac 11, crazy fast. MP7, crazy fast. Direct blowback guns, they go really fast. So this fire rate is a little leans towards direct blowback or overgassing, but not necessarily. I'm not going to change anything about that. It's okay. Especially with this light recoiling round. No reason to really change that. One interesting thing to note with velocities and weights, the higher mass a round is, the more energy it's going to have, whatever it hits target. But the faster a bullet goes, the more energy it can deliver over time. So it's more beneficial to have a fast bullet than it is to have a slow bullet. But there are pros and cons to both. There are reasons you want to have a big bullet sometimes, and there are reasons you want to have a small bullet. So I'm not necessarily going to knock it too much further than I already have. Last thing I'm going to talk about is 50-meter range. This is essentially a really high-powered airsoft gun with that type of bullet drop-off. So what that would mean is this bullet is so unaerodynamic that it is slowing itself down to such a rapid rate. It loses such substantial effectiveness that it just ceases to be effective out to 50 meters. Can't really think of any bullet that does that. Even a 22 long rifle, which is considered to be one of the very smallest bullets, it can certainly kill you beyond 50 meters. This so thoroughly has to be a game design thing to balance it out. This cannot exist. This cannot exist. This is just 100% here. If someone has a lore justification for that anemic round, I question whoever put that in a book. or wherever it's written or decided at, because the only thing I can think of is overwhelming a shield, and even then, that means once it overwhelms that shield, it is literally plinking off of that elite's armor or whatever else. It just loses all capability with these type of ballistics. These numbers are horrible. It shouldn't be fielded with these numbers. But let's take those numbers and look at what they might actually look like in a real gun. So again, snag-free, low profile, charging handle on the other side. Sweet God, I'm going to show some of that. Muzzle device, it's pretty thick for the small caliber that it is, but there's nothing really too bad against that. There's some pros and cons to having a larger muzzle device on a small gun. Most notably, they'll help reduce that vertical kick, even though you don't have a huge amount of leverage this far out from the gun. It's something. It can be some justification. Again, our folding grip that I did confirm does geometrically work. This is a rearward pulled trigger. That will be important in a minute. I'm not 100% sure what this mechanism is supposed to be, but it appears to be a magazine release. Everything I can find right away doesn't necessarily say, but that's what it appears to be. But every time I see them take it off, both in the animation or whatever, nobody touches that thing, so no clue. Magazine, this is actually just way too thin to be the cartridge they're stating. It's important to remember, caseless, whatever, doesn't matter. There are magazine walls that have to hold the magazine itself together, and inside of that are the actual cases. So it's not as if the bullet is taking up this entire magazine. It's more so that they are taking up somewhere underneath that magazine size. So the original dimensions that we looked at, they can't technically function in the magazine size that's depicted. So we're going to have to increase that overall. Again, doesn't matter if it's caseless or not. The dimensions have already been defined. They literally don't work. This palm swells are nice to have, but this is a very excessive palm swell. It is obviously made to mate up with the stock whenever it is collapsed. However, again, as I've explained with the assault rifle, this is excess material that doesn't need to exist. Regardless that it mates up, it doesn't need to be there. That becomes a problem in logistics whenever you're trying to, one, fill that space with a whole bunch of unnecessary material. And after you build 200 of these things, how many more guns could you have built with that extra material? Likewise, it's extra bulk that gets in the way. You can't roll your firing hand over as efficiently whenever there's extra material in the way. So if there was a magazine release, spoiler alert, if there was a magazine release here and you have small hands, this swell gets in the way of doing so. So it's just extra stuff. Yes, this is the pivot point, but this affects the lower wrist, which becomes a problem. So we're going to reduce that a little bit, just a little bit, not too much. Similarly, all of this material serves no function. It's all just to kind of connect and make a cool looking art style. Just to, I don't know if we need to remind people or not. But it's just to make a cool little art style. This button here, if it is a stock release, it would be more efficient to have it right there. Again, wasted space, wasted material. Let's be more efficient with our designs. So let's take a look at what we actually have at the end. This here, I know everyone just like me loves to see before and after pictures. First foremost, we have folding sights with a little bit of a ledge on there. Just for when they're folded down, you can get your finger up there and pop them up. Again, needs to be a little low profile so it fits wherever you're storing this thing at. Charging handle centered over the top of the weapon. Now it's important to note that this specific charging handle uses at least 1, 2, 3, and a spring, 4 pieces inside of it. During desperate times when cost and material is important, this would be replaced with just a nub. That's it. You see this with several Thompson variants where they just simplified it with a simple nub. Yes, they were always just a simple nub, but sometimes it was a nub on top, sometimes it was a nub on the side. It was a simplification over the years. You'll see in some of my VR renditions, I guess, that reloading this with the charging handle on the right side and magazine over here on the left is crazy difficult. There's no good way to do it. So why not simplify it? And we're going to go over training simplicity here in a minute whenever we talk about the magazine. This will come back up then. Next up, no reason to change muzzle device. As I stated, it serves its purpose. It's not going to do anything to really change it or reduce it too much. We did add on a little bit of a crow's beak here just to help protect. When people get under high amounts of stress, sometimes they grip their weapons incorrectly, and they may end up going over a hot part of the gun, or an area that can damage them or hurt them in some kind of way. What you do at 170 beats per minute is going to be completely different than what you do under 60 beats per minute. So having something like this to help protect the hand, whether you're going to wrap your thumb over here or around, it doesn't matter. This is just a simple textile reminder to not put your hand in front of the gun. Nothing to change about the grip. I actually like this little folding grip good. It serves the purpose. Again, compact weapon, you need some way to control it. Let's put a vertical grip on there. It does look as if there's a compartment inside here as well. As some service members will know, that is a secret place to hide all of your delectable Skittles, which undoubtedly UNSC Marines do as well. But you can also house things like cleaning kits or oil bottles. On my personal rifle that sits by my bedside, I actually have an oil bottle in here, and it has helped me out many times whenever I'm at a course or at a training event or something like that, or just to have an oil bottle on hand. You always forget something, and one thing you don't want to forget is some basic maintenance stuff. Trigger guard, slightly elongated. Some very astute viewers of the first episode noticed how tedious I was with trigger guards, but they also pointed out that there could be users with large gloves. There's a huge debate here to be had. However, what they were 100% right about is sometimes my trigger guards were not big enough for some of the garments that might be worn. One thing that doesn't make sense is to make one gun for 0.001% of your fighting force. That means only they can use it. So, having a Magnum that only Spartans can use, and the rest of your fighting force can't, that is a logistical nightmare to make sure that they have Magnums and no one else does. So, what would be better is to have universal weapons that fit everybody's hands and everyone can use. Time and place, again, depending on your stuff. But as we've seen with some of the lore, cost is apparently an important factor. Materials are apparently an important factor. So manufacturing one gun for one person, not ideal, not logistically feasible, not realistic. So let's make this universal for most shooters. We're going to slightly largen this up just in case there's a big fingered ogre over here. He can still use this. We also added a magazine release, normal magazine release. Should be able to just hit that with your thumb whenever it's time to come over here and do your reloads. We're going to add a 6-finger. Screw it, I've already started it. This magazine will drop free whenever you hit that button. Free and simple. Again, remember the original design, you have to come over here and grab this thing, throw it somewhere, then grab the new mag and put it on there. This here, I can start reaching for the new mag while I drop it with my other hand. This is called efficiency of motion. It's going to reduce your overall reload time to do it this way. Now we're going to get into the training. I can teach someone to shoot a pistol, the Magnum, whatever, and they know how to shoot this version of the SMG. Because where does the mag go? bottom of the grip, just like the pistol. How do you charge your pistol? You rack it across the top. So this allows you to train one weapon type and train on 2 completely different weapons. Yeah, there are slight differences, but overall training time is reduced, allowing you to get people more proficient and on the front line faster. Whereas whenever I train someone on this is the only gun they're going to reload from a side-mounted magazine. And as far as I'm aware, the only gun that they're going to have to reach over and grab a charging handle on the opposite side. Again, that is very specific training for a very niche weapon. So why not make it universal, where they can just learn it once and be good to go on multiple platforms? I think I've already mentioned we have bulkened up this magazine as well. It actually extends out to about here. When it's in its compact form, chances are this magazine would just be stored off to the side of it. There are bandolier pouches that you can find for modern weapons, where they're just emergency mags, more or less zip tied to the side of a gun. I suspect this will be the same thing. Because one really good thing about the original design is this is a very slick magazine. So for the purposes of being a very, very backup weapon for some crew member somewhere, that is the only case I can see that side-mounted magazine being a good option. Otherwise, would be even better is just having a smaller flush-fitted magazine, similar to how the MP7 does its 20-round magazines, in the gun at all times, and then you can have these 60-rounders stored in your armor or go bag somewhere. It makes more sense to do it that way. It's much more efficient. Again, reduces training time overall. We'll get here. Don't you worry. There could be springs and stuff in here. Technically, this mechanism works and can be fitted regardless if it's a side-mounted magazine or grip-mounted magazine. Both of the chambers end up being right about here. Well, let me correct that. Both of the chambers end up being right about here anyway. So as far as technical placement of, say, a bolt that might be reciprocating backwards, it doesn't need to go into the buffer tube, but it can. Again, if we even have a gas system in here, you could argue that our spring housing is along the top, giving us even more spring contact. We could have more springs here. Could just have fire control mechanisms like a little hammer back here. There are many possibilities. Point being, the technicalities of this design still kind of work, depending on all operation and stuff. So this doesn't need to be a full block like it is, but it also doesn't hurt that it is. I saw no reason to change this, so I didn't. This stock can still collapse to its previously planned dimensions. I just moved the button up here. That's it. Worth noting, I did add a very slight addition here. This could allow for sling mounting, QD mounts, whatever you want to call it. You don't see them in the game because 3D modeling a sling is notoriously difficult. It's not something that's reasonable for anybody. So, yeah, what they probably did whenever it came to slinging a weapon is leaned really heavy between these two here. They just said, magnets, whatever. I get it. Limitations of design and technology. They don't account for slings, but something like that could be mounted here or some other items. Who knows? Before I mention this, there is no smart link on this weapon. I don't know how you guys are aiming it in game. I don't know how the Spartans, I can't find a laser on this. Not on this variation. Sure, the ODST one has it, but this one doesn't have it. This one doesn't have it. This one does not have it. Where is it? Just kidding. I know that's going to rile somebody up, and I like having a good time. So, iron sights. Need iron sights. All systems are made to be countered. The assumption that your contact lenses, smart computer aiming system is going to work all the time is a very poor assumption. And we don't even seem to have one here, as far as I can tell. On most of the models I've looked at, there doesn't seem to be any space for additional computing or sensors. So I don't believe it exists on this variant of the SMG. We need to go to the trigger. Instead of a direct back trigger, I changed it for a levering trigger. This is going to move in a kind of sweeping arc. It's going to be very important for large fingers, large gloves, whatever. This way they can get in here, flat face. They are going to hit this trigger safety. which allows the trigger to actually be pulled, and then it's naturally going to fall into this hook, which allows the maximum amount of leverage on this point where the pin actually is. So it's going to make it much easier for the pull of the trigger to actually happen. It's going to feel like a more crisp trigger pull. It's just going to be more functional overall. I did not bother modeling a safety selector or anything. Reason being, again, the purposes of this weapon. This is kind of a severe backup. This is not necessarily a primary warfighter's weapon. Can be, yes, but not necessarily. So more than likely, they're going to carry this on an empty chamber until they think they need it, where they'll chamber the round and get ready to roll, or they'll chamber the round and just keep their finger off the trigger. Very similar to how modern day Glocks are, for example. As long as you're off the trigger, you're going to be okay. But again, this isn't the frontline fighter's weapon that's always out and exposed. It's only out when really needed. So, in my opinion, more than likely, they wouldn't even bother with the trigger. This is the last ditch weapon to get out of a fight. Having a safety in the way does tend to add in extra training hurdles. We found this with the 1911, where we trained people to use their safety, but during the stress of engagements, they forgot to disengage their safeties, reducing their ability to respond quite heavily. So under the premise of what this gun actually is, I went ahead and took it off and just opted for a trigger safety. As long as their finger's off the trigger, should be good to go. Now this mechanism here, it's not an ejection port. Remember, caseless ammunition. Nothing is going out of this gun. This is just an inspection chamber. So something goes wrong with the gun, because they're bound to. Everything mechanical is bound to fail at some point. This will at least allow you to just pop open a window, get to those internals, and clear them out if necessary. Even caseless ammunition that we previously experimented with, it was notoriously difficult for clearing malfunctions. Take the German G11, the space, I'm not going to use the word, space magic gun, for example. If that thing got jammed up, you just may as well send it back to the factory, because you're not going to do it right there. They're not the only gun that did it, and they had to learn from it as well. So having some type of window that you can just push a button, this window opens up, and now you can see through, theoretically, both sides to your smiling compadre over there. Allows you room to get in there, clear out your malfunctions, and keep on going. Outside of that, it's not really necessary. If I didn't mention it, this bolt charging handle is non-reciprocating. So whenever you shoot, this is not going to kick back every single time. I don't know if the one in game does. I don't remember. But this particular one will not. Otherwise, every time it hits this rearmost travel point, that lever is going to slap upwards. Might look cool for graphical design, but practicality, it's not a good idea. Likewise, this chamber here does not reciprocate open. This is an on-demand action. Opening it up, even during shooting, it's detrimental. It's just ingress point for more debris. So unless you personally open it up, it's going to stay closed the whole time. That's about all I've got for the submachine gun. By all means, if there's some lore that I'm not aware of that I just absolutely butchered, please let me know. I will learn from it this time and hopefully consider it next time. But as best as I can tell, this is what a practical Halo SMG would look like. I look forward to y'all's comments and concerns, and hopefully we can keep on going, because I quite enjoy doing this. And thank you, KYOT, for the opportunity to do this and have a good old time. And I hope it can continue.
I find these alterations and reasonings for them to be very interesting. Thank you, Instructor Lespina, for taking the time to consider your changes, and for you, the viewer, for watching to the end. If you skipped all the way to the end, however, revert to last checkpoint. You may check out Spear Training Group by clicking on the link in the description below, and you'll enjoy my other videos that I've created that you see on screen right now. Go ahead and check them out, and consider subscribing. Thank you.